hand over to Prof. Wong Man Sam. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Swinal. Good afternoon. This is the second part of my lecture. It's Forms Follow Systems from Medium to Large. This is about scaling up, making a bigger impact from where we were in the last 20-25 years. I ask myself now whether I am still an architect or an advocate, but I think the answer would be 50-50, because I think it's beginning to be very pertinent and important that I advocate as well, since we are in an existential crisis where I think the human species is endangered. In 2016, we put out this book, Garden City, Mega City, Rethinking Cities for the Age of Global Warming. We knew it was coming, and that all the turn of century architecture, sort of all about forms, shapes. It's kind of not heading the right direction. We persisted in the way we were thinking from when we graduated and started practice, being responsible architects, doing architecture with sustainability. And we were sort of misunderstood quite a bit as to why we put why do we build plants on our buildings? And I think it's important that we now acknowledge that humans is part of nature. We do need to coexist with nature to survive as a human species. So this book was instrumental in us rethinking and putting down into paper, into a book, almost as a textbook for students, people who are interested and decision makers, about how we can actually see design and form making informed by systems. So there are 4 chapters in the book. The one highlighted here is called Layering Cities. It's about how we think about cities in terms of various major topics. One of our favorites is multiple ground levels, where we see creating multiple ground levels in a building as something that is a positive thing and that can be replicated, that overcomes density. You can create high density, yet you can create high amenity. I won't go through all of them, but you could actually look up the book and refer to it. Some other interesting ones, which I talked about in an earlier lecture, was about sky villages. And I will talk a little bit more about inverted skyline later in this lecture. Planting cities is fairly straightforward. And this is what we're beginning to be quite acknowledged for, putting plants, trees onto our buildings. We have come up with a vocabulary of how you can do planting in buildings and how you can integrate it. We have screen of greens, which are vertical planting. Sky gardens, sky parks are really about horizontal urban sort of habitat for plants and nature. And then tropical architecture can be scaled up, where we see it being an infrastructure to support integrated landscaping. Breeding cities is something I talk a little bit more about in my first lecture, is that how we create sort of a breezy and sort of a pleasant microclimates within our buildings. We have quite a bit of this being explained in the first lecture, but I would actually talk about breezeway courtyards later in this lecture. But the last chapter, called Rating Cities, is very important to us. We created 5 ratios. We think these 5 ratios can have catalytic effect on cities if we start measuring this. We are so often, we use ratios like GFA, site coverage, sort of a floor-to-wall ratio. This indexes are sort of very often used, but it may be a bit more related to real estate, but it doesn't sort of tell you whether or not the building, is a good city, is a good master plan or not. So we thought about what we can actually come up with that hopefully, developers, cities can actually adopt some of this and kind of create a environment that encourages this, the purpose behind this ratio. I will show you how it has reflected in our buildings, but good news is that such ratios has been taken up by a few cities in the region. In Taiwan, Taichung has taken up and using some of these ratios and has very good impact on their cities. Even Australia, Brisbane is looking at some of these indexes and that they will be hoping to implement some of them to encourage developers to do good buildings. In fact, a lot of developers come to us and because of these ratios, and they want to actually do good. So some of these enlightened developers are sort of, getting onto the bandwagon and wanting to do good for the environment. So just to explain a few of these indexes, the green plot ratio is fairly simple. It's about the amount of landscape surfaces compared to the development site area. Community plot ratio is the community spaces that we allocate within development over the site area. Civic generosity is a more difficult one. It's about how the development encourages and facilitates public life in the city. Ecosystem contribution index is a degree where development supplements the city's ecosystem. And the last one, self-sufficiency index, is a development capacity provides its own energy, food, and water. This one is a very important one in today's climate, where we are going through a pandemic, where we have limited, our sort of supply chains are affected, we can't travel. The topic about whether or not cities, countries to be self-sufficient is something that I think has got heads turning and people discussing about it. So just to recap some of the projects I explained earlier and how they work, how they rate with our own ratings. We did these ratings also to push ourselves that the next project that we do, we must be at least better than the last. We don't quite like to stay put, but we like to always constantly push the agenda and do better. And so this was the basis for us to measure ourselves. So this SOTA, as I mentioned earlier, what is interesting is that the community plot ratio is high because I was saying this was the cheese building. We were creating a lot of volume, a lot of anti-mass building or negative mass, basically a lot of voids. And these voids were actually social informers, learning and teaching spaces for the school. And you can see the percentage of it being 220%, 2.2 times over the site area. So Park Royal and Pickering, again, you can see the green plot ratio is very high. That's why it's actually quite a darling of the media for greening, not so much for sustainability, which is intended to be, but just integrated landscaping. There's a lot of greenwashing, and now green design seems to be an ism where it's about how much green you can have in the building. And it's a bit disappointed. I do hope that everyone here in this webinar do understand that green building is about sustainability. It's a holistic, integrated, sustainable strategy that we are sort of driving at. So Skyview in Dawson, you can see even if it's a public housing, we were able to create a fairly high community plot ratio of 140%. And this one pushed the agenda of green plot ratio a lot, where we created 1100% of green replacement. And this has a fairly good impact on how to perceive skyscrapers in a city and how we can actually plan in such a way that we can actually reintroduce and encourage biodiversity in our urban areas. And Kampong Admiralty is a sort of integrating quite a few systems. So the scores are fairly general in nature. I will now take you through a series of buildings where to talk about typology and how we can actually scale up some of this typology to precinct scale and then to larger master plans and city scale. And I think this is quite important because I think city planners crunch a lot of numbers. They tend to lack the three-dimensional quality of what buildings, architecture can contribute to the bigger picture, to the city scale. So this is where in one of the chapters in our book is called Prototypology, where we see every building of ours as a new prototype. And when scaled up, it has a certain impact in the city. So this is the Singapore Pavilion at the World Expo. It was meant to be open last year, but due to the pandemic, it will be open in October this year, in 1.5 months' time. It's almost finishing. It's quite exciting. The greening is already in place, and it does look quite like this rendering we have. But what was the starting point? The starting point was really about thinking about Dubai and Singapore. We are both man-made ecosystems, but we do learn from nature, sort of biomimicry, how we actually learn from nature to create our own habitats, perhaps. So when I was thinking about Dubai, you know, the Middle Eastern countries, which is basically a semi-desert to a desert area, where are all the landscaping? There must be some form of nature in it. So immediately the idea of an oasis came to mind. An oasis is a sort of a water hole for animals, but it's also where it's a collection of water and also where plants will start to thrive. So we think that if we can actually recreate an oasis in Dubai as the pavilion, we can perhaps start thinking about larger topics like reversing desertification and creating a different city form, another building form for the Middle East countries. One of my criticism about the skyscrapers in the cities in Middle East is that form just doesn't, the typology isn't right for the climate, where you build these vertical skyscrapers, these needles in the sky, which is nothing about exposing your surface areas to the sun and creating a huge energy load on the building. So this is where I think the difference in this small little pavilion is a demonstration that we scale it up. We can create a different typology for building in the desert and the semi-desert areas. So you can see here in this section, it actually has a basement where we have the back of house facilities. The first 3 levels is nothing but a 3-dimensional garden. We had so much, we packed in so much landscaping in here that this building, actually, this small little plot does a lot of ecosystem services. I will show you some data later, and that we can actually see the comparison between this pavilion and a sort of a typical bungalow in Dubai. But yet, we actually created usable area on the top level, where it's what we call the sky market, where Singapore communicates with the world. There will be arena, there's area for sort of cocktail parties and also general mingling around. So you will be walking into a 3-dimensional garden. You will wander around into 3 cones, and these 3 cones are sort of a very innovative way in which we wanted to think about integrated landscaping. We have inclined and sort of a natural sloping vertical green. We have green on the ground, but we also now have green on the ceiling. We are defying gravity by creating a 3-dimensional sort of a enclosed ecosystem of landscaping. And this is done through having the entire roof area in solar panels indirectly creating the food, the sunlight, the energy for the plants through grow lights and using sun pipes. So this experience that you will have of this small little oasis starts when you sort of meander around the tree cones and then takes you onto a canopy walk that will bring you around the cones into 3 different exhibits: a rainforest exhibit, then a city cone where we highlight some of the amazing things that we do in Singapore, and then a flower cone where we actually highlight the beauty of Singapore orchids. So this is the canopy walk. So you'll be able to see landscaping engulfing you from the sides, from the bottom, from the top. And then through all this meandering through the 3 cones and the canopy of the landscaping, you arrive at this marketplace, which is almost the entire footprint of the buildable area as a usable space. So here you wind up. But what is actually impactful about this pavilion, because of the full coverage of these sort of the footprint of the building as PV panels, we are able to create a zero energy, zero water, and zero waste pavilion. Water is desalinated using the solar panels, energy from the solar panels, and complete recycling of the waste. Any food waste is going to be composted. Any other waste will be recycled, including the final disassembly of this pavilion. But what is noteworthy is the fact that we wanted to see the ecosystems services of this pavilion, if it's scaled up, will make an impact in the semi-desert and desert areas. So we are comparing against Dubai's natural sandy vegetation, and then with a typical local bungalow, which is about the same size as this pavilion, comparing the Singapore pavilion and then scaling up to district level. So you can see the ecosystem services that the pavilion provides. It helps to purify air. So if you see these indexes here, you see that as a basis, Dubai's natural sandy vegetation is always 100%. And then next to it is the local bungalow, how it performs, and then our Singapore pavilion, how it performs, and finally, when it's scaled up into a district like the Palm Jumeirah, which is full of these local bungalows, what sort of impact it will have. So you can see the scores that we are doing very well. So we exceed the ecosystem services of what a Dubai natural sandy vegetation would do. An amount of oxygen too is almost twice of that. Water runoff is almost equal to that. Visual screening, of course, is better. And solar heat reduction too, we are doing much better, almost twice. And the carbon dioxide sequestered is almost 700% of the Dubai's natural sandy vegetation. And then, of course, noise screening, because of vegetation, it also helps a lot. The reason why when it's scaled up is less, we started taking into account some of the precinct services like roads and M&E services. So the rating starts to go down a little bit, but not too much. So we wanted to also explain, if we actually move this pavilion even to a further extent, what it can possibly do. There's a possibility that it will actually reverse desertification. There is science in it that with sort of reintroducing of vegetation, it's possible to increase rainfall by 30%. And this is a bit of a summary of the good things at the regenerative scale that any cities, any countries should consider. I will not run through all of them, but some of the things that I think will be meaningful to discuss later is the desertification by 3-dimensional planning. Half Earth is something that I'm quite interested in which we started calling some of our cities and master plan 50-50 cities, in which we do think it's important for us to reserve and allocate 50% of the land to be rewilded, to be for nature, so that the planet can regenerate. Some of these other things could be considered are sort of integrated landscaping, sort of move towards plant and lab-based food, permaculture landscaping. So these are some of the good practices I think the world can actually go into. This is a summary of all of them, and that if it's sort of pushed actively, hopefully the world, or rather not the world, the human species will at least have a fighting chance in 2050. I think the report by the UN, latest report, is not very good. Man is responsible for what we are going through, the existential crisis, and that if we don't act up now, it will only get worse. But if we do the right things and push the agenda, hopefully by 2050, there is still a fighting chance for the human race. This next project is something that I've never shown before. It's our entry for the Founders Memorial in Singapore, and it was a scale-up version of the Singapore Pavilion. I wanted to show this primarily because it demonstrates how, if you look at something small, you can actually think of it as a scale-up project. So this one is about almost 10 to 20 times the scale of the Singapore Pavilion. At the same time, we have been able to achieve zero energy with this building, and water is not an issue in Singapore. So I'll just run through quickly just to show you what it can possibly look like if the pavilion has been scaled up. The roof is entirely dedicated to solar panels. And if we think about what is the best form and the most efficient form of clean energy for the tropics and the desert area, is certainly solar panels. And for the tropics, it needs to be on the roof because it's the most effective way. So that actually does inform your form, and it does inform how you would do three-dimensional planning. The top layer should always be reserved for producing clean energy. So as a section, you can see it's quite similar. There are a lot of gallery spaces and community use spaces within this facility. And of course, the amount of greenery here exceeds the Singapore Pavilion. The amount of ecosystem services that it actually would provide also does very well. Both on the inside and outside, we also have landscaping. And the landscaping starts to frame views. And even the roof can have event spaces that really takes in the beauty of the city. And the whole memorial was a little symbol of Singapore as a little red dot. This is another scaling up of our typology. I mentioned about our cheese building, SOTA. This is the scale up version. This is scale up to almost 2.5 times the floor area. But in terms of capacity for the students, SOTA was really a building designed for 1,200 students. But in this Brown University in Dhaka, it's actually scaled up to house 12,000 students, but over 2.5 times in terms of floor area. So in terms of scale and in terms of per meter square for different cities, it varies. Singapore is fairly generous, but I think in a sort of a highly populated city like Dhaka, space standards are not as generous. But here, in terms of the ratios, we have been able to do very well. But this is the sort of breakdown of the systems that we were really looking at. We were looking at how we can create effective cross ventilation, creating horizontal beachways, creating again a lot of social spaces, informal learning and garden spaces for the university, creating a large public space on the ground floor that's dedicated to the community, is open for the community to use, and to top it up, a solar canopy to provide the energy needs for the university. We started off designing for actually a lesser quantum of students. It started off being only 8,000 to 10,000. We were able to achieve the sort of zero energy status for the building, but because they keep pushing the size of the capacity of university, they finally raised it to 12, and with a target of 15,000 students, and the amount of facilities were added, we were not being able to achieve zero energy. So we almost achieved up to about 75% of the energy used through the solar canopy. But it's a combination of passive strategy and sort of innovative mechanical systems being adopted in the building. Most times of the year, we particularly in the winter and in the cooler part of springs and autumn, you don't need any form of cooling. We can actually use the effective breezeway, horizontal breezeway, to cause an effective ventilation to the classrooms. But during the winter, during the summer period, we have come up together with Transolar a system where it is actually a hybrid system where cool air is pumped in using and with elevated wind speed in the classroom, only using 40% of the energy compared to air conditioning. I think this is somewhat also used in SDE building, and this is actually implemented here. So the energy reduction is an important part of achieving zero energy as much as we can, is to reduce the energy used in the buildings. What is also quite fundamental in the approach here is reducing the amount of spaces to be air conditioned. So all the social spaces, all the circulation spaces are not air conditioned. And certainly the ground floor, other than the multipurpose hall and the auditorium, most of the spaces are not air conditioned. So just to look at the plan, this is a site plan. The entire roof is dedicated to recreation. You have a running track, you have a swimming pool, and including a cricket field. But what is actually important about this design is our three-dimensional planning, the layering of different uses, and the club sandwich approach that we've taken. This is what Dhaka is like. It's pretty chaotic, it's bustling, it's very vibrant, and we wanted to create an oasis in sort of a very vibrant and busy destination, to create an oasis of calm, turn the ground floor into a community park for the people. And then at the same time, as in Sota, there is a escalators and staircase that bring people in the upper levels and becomes a secure and private academic spaces for the university. So these are some of the courtyard entry spaces that brings people into the campus ground. And as you arrive onto the ground level, it's an oasis of calm. We are using a large a water body, and this water body serves the function of sort of cleansing the rainwater, and also being implemented as a grey water system for the department. And you can see also from below, the solar canopy is almost the full extent of the building footprint. So this is the sort of a community park. We talk to the university, and we do want to encourage them to open it up and to engage the community to allow people to be able to use this space. So in terms of a section, you can see on top, it is the long section across one of the breezeway, how the escalators brings people to some of the important nodes, like the library, like the canteen, like the lecture theaters. And in between them, we also have staircases, and then bringing people all the way to the top where we have the swimming pool and the recreational areas. And below, you can see the such section. You can see the breezeways being cut perpendicularly. It is actually a true space between buildings. There is enough, we have created pockets in the roof to bring natural light in. So this long covered breezeways are not actually dark. They are actually all naturally lit. And then you can see on the ground floor, it's got very little footprint. It is actually a very porous ground plane to encourage the community to use this park. So these are some of the social spaces in the upper stratum, where it's the private and secured academic areas for the students. And the escalators sort of bring people up. Because of the number of students here, we needed to depend on escalators rather than lifts. As I mentioned before, my first lecture, lifts are very antisocial spaces. Horizontal movement, escalators is something that we think will engender a better community spirit within the development and for the campus. And the upper stratum is really a bright and airy, breezy, new kind of environment for a inner city, very dense city, yet at the same time creating the right quality of spaces, high amenity for the university. This is a different project again. This is not going to be built, but this is an interesting one because it's all about transport and mobility. I think this is something I think would be good for you as students to look at and to maybe pick up some ideas, because it addresses mobility from fast to slow. This is basically a transportation hub where previously the high-speed rail would terminate here near this facility, and there's also a connection of a few MRT lines and the bus interchange. It will also be the headquarters for the Land Transport Authorities of Singapore. So this is the site. You can see all these MRT lines crisscrossing each other. And you can see the land is fairly underutilized because this was only thought of as a single-use space. But in high-density, land-limited Singapore, we do need to think of multiple uses for any single piece of land. And what is really being used for in this piece of land is our foreign workers sort of using it for their downtime. And that actually gave us a very clue how we should actually turn this space into a useful park for the community. So this is what we call it, the Jurong Park Station. Jurong is where it is, station being a station for transportation, and park is because we wanted to introduce a park into this typology. It has all these important uses all around it, from hospitals to public social housing to to offices, business park, connecting to Malaysia, to the CDB of Singapore, the second CDB of Singapore, and factories and other schools, and also Jurong Lake as well. So this is two little diagrams, how the site was seen as only a single use, but because of too many access roads around, we decided that we actually use the development to plunge a road to bypass the site and then start to create a larger park so that actually it will become beneficial to the residents and be sizable to turn into a business, to a community park. So we expanded this by 4.5 times. So this is the site plan where you still can see all this MRT lines coming out from the train station, going in different direction, but yet at the same time, underneath all of this is now a community park. And on the bottom right is also the connection through a new form of a medium mobility to connect the high-speed rail to this facility. So in terms of a party and a diagram, this was how it would work. The lines are existing. We have to build on top of this, leaving this busy MRT tracks running all the time, but we actually erect the Land Transport Authority headquarters. And yet at the same time, free up the ground level from vehicles and turning into a community and civic park. So in the long section, you can see the train lines runs across. we actually have the car parking above, offices, community users. There are a few different stakeholders here. You have LTA, you have National Library, you have PA. So there's again integrated development of many stakeholders. In the basement, we have allocated to be the bus interchange so that there will be a seamless connection between buses, people using PMDs, and then mass rapid transit, and also connecting to the high-speed rail. So this is actually truly a TOD project. So this is a short section. You can see how the existing train lines are and how we actually build on top of it and yet create enough daylight to illuminate the bus waiting, the train concourse areas, and also the bus interchange. So this is a rendering of the bus interchange in the basement. You can actually see the railway tracks above, the MRTs running above, and yet still getting natural light to the basement. And then you can see directly outside of this is the bus interchange. So yet on the upper level is a new ground level, which is an oasis of calm. You have another smaller community park on it. It also has a running track around the buildings, and all the buildings contribute towards contribute all this planting all around it, contributing a higher green replacement for this development. So this is a typical section, but cut across on the 8th floor to show you how the running track is embedded in the towers, connecting all these various towers and all these stakeholders together using recreation. So you can see as overall the sort of runway tracks running around, but underneath is now turned into a community park for Jurong. So this is a quote from Jane Jacobs. I think it's quite important, and I think this leads us to discuss more about mobility. So this, what is important for us is how this is really a true transport hub. How this building can send out feelers to connect to all the precincts and to all the various major population nodes within adjacent to this development, and also connecting Malaysia and also connecting to our central business district area. And I'll show you how we did it. So we realized that between Singapore's Vision's second CBD area and CBD1, we have what we call sort of the railway corridor. All we need to do is actually to connect to it. And also at the same time, there's an elevated MRT station that runs all the way from Jurong to the CDB area. And then it actually joins up with the railway corridor and also another green spine within the city itself. So we wanted to make all this connection all the way to the south and also connecting to the Jurong neighborhood as well. So this is what we created, all these pillars that are actually for pedestrians and personal mobility devices, people using scooters, people using bicycles, and yet safe walkways for pedestrians, connecting people to the various neighborhoods. What is really quite nice about Jurong at the moment, there's what they call the Jaywalk, where it actually connects all the buildings together. This is connecting to that network and creating a bigger network for pedestrians. But now we decided that we actually would bring in the medium mobility, where bicycles, scooters can actually be accommodated and sort of design viaducts for this mobility. I think we catered too much about for catering for fast mobility and for cars, but we haven't done enough for pedestrians and for PMDs. And I think this was one exercise that we thought maybe that it's possible for us to consider building for it. And as you can see, the roof structure over this mobility devices and fillers are always covered with PV panels, increasing the surface area where we can actually have solar panels to create more energy, clean energy for development for the city. So, so on the left, you can see is an existing MRT. Using existing structure, we are able to create a new deck level that will have bicycle paths and pedestrian paths, and also create a linear park by having planters along the way to provide shade and shelter through the PV panels, and also a biophilic quality next to the mobility fillers. On the right side is also a just dedicated to bicycles and pedestrians. It is actually an overhead connection that links up various buildings, and that you can actually join up as many buildings as possible. So it will connect as a network. And then there are also how it actually works together with the ground level, where the ground level is also turned into a park. And then also with the new J line, and also with the fast train coming in, all this will start to connect the entire district and the entire second CDB of Singapore. So in terms of the plan, this was what we wanted to do. We wanted to create nodes that were sort of mobility kiosks, where you can have shared bicycles, you could have a bicycle repair kiosk. It will also be a little stop for cyclists. It could also have storage facilities, delivery facilities, all incorporated into it. And yet at the same time, it is actually a mobility device that is separating vehicles from slow to medium mobility. One thing we were quite adamant was to be able to provide universal access. So it's actually provided for by using lifts to bring people onto this mobility device. So you can see how the undercroft space of the MRT now is to turn into a very park-like quality, where it also does a lot of ecosystems services for the city. So this was the connection to the high-speed rail. It was a little short monorail system, and yet at the same time plugging onto the bigger network of the pedestrian and cycling network. And this is an aerial view of it, how all this fillers starts to branch out from this a transport hub and connecting the various neighborhoods and buildings. And then when it comes to the existing neighborhood, a series of covered walkways, and reimagining and how the landscape can turn into a more like a park-like ambience, and start to reduce the amount of car parking and roads we have in our existing urban fabric. Some of these are actually implemented in Tampines when we did an exercise, which is part of the exercise we did with NUS and with the Minister Heng Swee Keat. Some of these little things are implemented, but not on a big scale. Okay, another different kind of transport hub. Here you see is actually for Singapore's Mandai Resort. Currently is under construction. This was a proposal that we did. We were not selected. I think again, as most of our projects are always overly ambitious, I think most clients and developers tends to get frightened. But nevertheless, it does inform us how we can push the design agendas. When we do win it, we will implement as much as possible, but we do like to reach for the stars and do as much as we can. So when you start to cut it back, it still achieves a very high quality of our vision. Here, it was about bringing a new form of mobility, the fast mobility, MRTs, right into the doorstep of the Singapore Mandai Resort. Here you can see below is the MRT and also the car parking and the buses. But on the ground level, again, is a tranquil of calm. It's a park, but it's actually your arrival. It has many of the sort of Mandai Resort amenities, the sort of reception, some of the administration, some of the front of house of the hotels, and some of the front of house to the various parks within the Mandai Resort. But what is important is that above it is a shelter, and it is actually a land bridge that allows animals to move freely away from people. So if we look at the Mandai area, this is Mandai Road. Set in this landscaping is the existing zoo, the night zoo, and in future, the Mandai Resort that will incorporate a rainforest park and also the bird park. And this new transport hub would be the main entrance facility to connect all these various parks together. So when we look at a bigger picture of Mandai, we realize that Mandai Road is now connected by highways. You hardly need this Mandai Road anymore. It's lost its purpose. You can actually move around using the expressway, and that we wanted to downgrade this road into and renature this path into a very sensitive and a friendly a road that can be used to bring people here, but friendly for animals to cross at night, at any time. Because one of the biggest problems about Mandai Road is the road kills because it's there's sort of fast-moving cars through it. So we suggested removing this road, downgrade it, and turn it into a sort of only a two-way gravel road, and allow the canopy of trees to be planted close to another, so that the canopy can start to bridge each other, so that monkeys could swing from one tree to the other again. And then having the MRT station coming in at the underground, under the Mandai Road, and then to end up in the entrance facility. So connecting the various sort of a park within the Mandai Resort, we proposed a Mandai Mobile, and this is a very friendly, family-friendly mobility device, where it's actually good for wheelchairs, it's actually good for elderly, it's good for groups, and it would actually move within the area in a rather slowish manner, giving priority to people and also animals. So this is a larger extent of the Mandai Resort, having the various facilities. And this was the cross-section of our buildings, where we have the MRT below, the bus interchange, lots of car parking, and then this Mandai Mobile that connects the entry facility to the various park destination. And this was Mandai Road, the existing Mandai Road. We reimagine it being renatured and downgraded to allow the tree canopy to start bridging and to allow animals to freely cross it. And this is Mandai Link, which actually currently is where you go in to Mandai Zoo and the Night Zoo. And we completely rewilded it and have this Mandai Mobile, which is the rail being embedded in the landscape, giving people a truly wild and nature experience. This is all the current infrastructure. being turned into beautiful streams and lakes and renatured as much as possible. And this was the Mandai Link that was turned into a gravel path for people. And then you can see the Mandai Mobile connecting to the larger entrance pavilion. You don't see it because it's covered with landscaping, but you see all these sun pipes that actually brings natural light into the rendering that I showed you earlier. And then we also did a scheme for the resort, for the hotel, a resort hotel within the development, and we call it the hike because we wanted people to hide from the animals, to be able to be living in the environment, but not being able to intrude into the realm of the nature. This park is basically nature first, people second. So people are going to hide away from the animals and the insects. And basically all the movement will be underground, and they only emerge into the building directly from an underground connection. And even the ground level is actually renatured as much. It sits on pallets, and that even the facade of the building is such that it's preventing animals from seeing what's inside. And you can actually from inside see out, but not disturb the environment. So this is from inside looking out. So it has got screens, and that animals hopefully will not be disturbed by this. Okay, there's one chapter in a book called Self-Sufficient City. And I think this is, I mentioned earlier, it's quite important, primarily because currently in our pandemic, due to the supply chains being affected, the topic of self-sufficiency is very important. We always try to think how Singapore is a land-limited country and city, which could be land-limited. One of the most difficult, self-sufficient rather, one of the most difficult thing is how do we create self-sufficiency in terms of clean energy. Due to the lack of land, this is one of the hardest thing to do. To be self-sufficient in water, I think Singapore is going to achieve it very, very soon. In terms of self-sufficient in food, it's not difficult. Singapore's target is to achieve self-sufficiency in food in 2030. But if we scale out industrial food production, we can easily meet the target of self-sufficiency in any time if we are committed to spend the money in it, to create factories for food. But what is important is that we need to start thinking how to create enough horizontal surfaces to turn into PV canopies so that we can actually harvest as much clean energy as possible. So one of the ideas that we had in layering cities in the chapter of the first chapter of our book, Garden City, Mega City, is inverting the skyline. Instead of the usual bar chart that city skyline like in New York, we reversed it. Have a flat top, but have an undulating ground datum that allows the landscape and nature to permeate it. So this was a different, completely rethinking how the city typology can be effected. So you can see as an aerial image, the top is all about enlarging the canopy for solar harvesting. So this was a new town development for 250,000 people. Because this is residential, residential energy usage is less than the other uses. Say if you are 5 to 6 story with reduced energy loads, efficient buildings, less reliance of air conditioning, your footprint of your building should be able to sufficiently give you enough footprint for creating zero energy. But if you're 10 to 12, you almost need to double this footprint. So in this case, this development, this master plan restricted by the airports around it, we had the height control, and it allows us to go to about 10 to 12 stories, which is perfect. And we actually created twice the footprint size as the solar canopy for this entire district, making it zero energy. So you can see these are based on the courtyard breezeways, where the buildings are lifted up as the inverted skyline, the landscape allowed to permeate the buildings, and also at the same time allowing nature to also permeate it. You can see we have enlarged the canopy for the buildings, for the solar canopy, by cantering out from the footprint of building by twice the footprint, so that we can actually create a zero energy new town. So these are the 4 layers as part of our 3-dimensional planning. The lowest level is the transportation and service level. It is actually a basement and true ground. True ground is one that we think should be left for extensive planting of big trees. That's the best form of way of sequestering carbon. Second is the parkland layer, where is a segregated pedestrian-friendly environment and deck, almost an E-deck, connecting you to the MRT trains and the faster mobilities. And then we have the residential and the workplace layer in between, and on top we have the rooftop canopy layer. So as a section, you can see how it works. Ground layer and undulating terrain that meets the parkland layer, and then the buildings above, whether it's offices or whether it's actually residential, it supports the large solar canopy. And under the solar canopy, with the adjustments of the solar canopy, PV spacing, we allow enough light to actually have 1 layer of farms, commercial farms under the solar canopy. So we were able to achieve also 100% self-sufficiency in vegetables for this residents in this new town. So as you can see, how it actually seen from the top, and then the farmland layer. And the ground layer, the community park layer, is for our pedestrians, and also for a new form of district mobility. This is the last project that I'll show you. This is scale up even bigger. This is happening in Singapore, under construction at the moment. It's called Pongo Digital District, that includes Singapore Institute of Technology. We did the master plan of this whole area. There's almost 20 hectares. And while we were not successful in the new town master plan, the Zero New Town master plan, we were commissioned to do this master plan for Pongo. So a lot of the ideas that we thought about in the earlier master plan are being implemented here. So I'll show you more about the implementation and talk through some of these implementation strategies that we have. So this is where Pongo Digital District is located in the northeast part of Singapore. And there is a current population in Pongo that almost amounts to 350,000 people. But there is actually very little work in this area. So putting this business park at the university here provides a lot of work for the residents in this district, and making their commute shorter, and turning it into a 15-minute district. So this was a very good plan, is to implement this business district in this area, and to also put a university in this area. So what you see here in red is a new MRT line. The MRT will arrive into the center of our development. So there are 2 important spines here. One is the extension of the MRT line, the northeast line terminating in the Nelly extension under the first phase of JTC Business Park. And the other one that is also an important spine is the old Pongo Road, or the existing Pongo Road, that will be turned into a heritage trail. It will be expunged, it will be turned into a pedestrian pathway for the residents and for the community. So this is the area view of the master plan and the business park incorporating the university, surrounding it in the north, in the south, in the west, and the east is all HDB housing estate. In the middle will be the university and the business park. There's a small pocket of residential, sort of landed residential next to it. It's basically made up of industry and also made up of education and a few reserve sites. So again, like the three-dimensional planning that we had, the lowest level, the ground level, or rather the subterranean level, is actually the vehicle and servicing layer. I'll explain more a little later about it. And then the next layer is a very pedestrian and community-friendly environment. It's the community park layer. We have almost taken out all the roads from 20 hectares and turned it into a pedestrian park-like environment for the users and also for the community at large. And then we have above that, the academic and the office layers. And of course, on the very top, the tropical umbrella, having the solar canopy and also commercial food farms. This is the section across the university and the business park. Here, this is on the left is the landmark building for the university. It housed the university library and the student forum, and also some sort of lab facilities and classrooms. And on the right is the JTC Business Park. It's very connected by the ground level, by the underground connection, and also elevated connection, which we call the collaboration loop. Here you can see the ground level is actually very pedestrian friendly. It's the MRT, which you can see at the lowest level, sort of under the one of the business park buildings, and it arrives in this big public space that we call the Nexus, which is a very large tropical community space, bigger than the one in Kampong Admiralty, bigger than the other ones that we've done. It is able to house something like 3,000 to 5,000 people. And in the long section, you will see the basement is doing the heavy lifting for this master plan and for this new development, this whole area, because it will incorporate the MRT coming in, the future mobility, logistic, and the district services. And yet above ground is a park-like environment and aerial connection connecting buildings and verandas that will look into a community park. This is the section cutting across the campus boulevard, which connects, is actually the path of the MRT connecting to the development, and it's turned into a pedestrian-friendly pedestrian mall. And it brings people to the waterfront. At the end is Coney Island. So I'll just explain how we created a park, a sort of a people-centric car-like district. So in terms of a strategy, instead of your traditional city block, where you have all this network of roads, we went for a city block, where we only utilize the existing plan network, and the internal roads are turned into pedestrian walkways, and the connections that we need in the between buildings and entrances, drop-offs are actually brought into the underground and connected between buildings, thereby freeing up the entire area as a pedestrian-friendly environment. So you can see the top is the diagrammatic explanation of it. The bottom, as superimposed, was the original plan, the road plan of the development, and that they all turn into green pedestrian-friendly pathways. So by incorporating the MRT right smack into the master plan, it brings people from all over Singapore into this pedestrian-friendly environment, exiting the MRT directly into Nexus, into a park-like sort of ground plane. Also connected to it is the bus interchange, the extensive connection between all the buildings that's for use for servicing and also for car parking. So the good thing about connecting the car park together is that we are able to reduce the number of car parks and also being able to connect to different buildings so that you can exit to the main roads by different exit points. So this is the is the undulating site. So we can see one area, so the north area is the ground level where we have the Nexus and the bus interchange. And then the connection across to SIT, which is down south, is connecting all the buildings of SIT together. So basically, you don't see any roads on the ground level. They're all embedded in the subterranean. So as I mentioned before, the basement is doing a lot of heavy lifting. We envision this as a underground subterranean structure, primarily because in future, a lot of the vehicles will be autonomous. You don't need people to drive them. You can actually drop off and then they find its way to park their cars or they move out. We have the same goes for buses as well. So in fact, we think that a lot of the energy usage can be reduced further in future when all these autonomous vehicles start plying the basement. We of course have the MRT coming directly into the development, but the main sort of services is sort of accommodating in the basement are the district services. We have district cooling, we have pneumatic conveying system, we have a smart grid, all the connections are made underground. We have a centralized logistic hub where from all the ports, they'll bring to this area and then be transferred into drones to be delivered to all the addresses in the development. It will be an autonomous vehicle hub. So some of the parking spaces for autonomous vehicles will be parking here. And also it connects to the MRT, the transportation nodes. There are also other facilities like substations and M&E services and facilities that are actually embedded in the basement. So sort of freeing up the ground level, you don't have any more substations, they're all underground. So this is one of the renderings showing the MRT entrances connecting to the Nexus, very direct connection, but also multiple uses again. All the staircases turning into event spaces and social spaces. This is a community-centric district, and I'll tell you why. We studied the whole network of Singapore again. What is the pedestrian-friendly and bicycle-friendly network? We have the rail corridor, we have the Round Island route, and we have the Kallang corridor, and we have extensive sort of PCN, all connecting around the four corners of Singapore. And we actually thought we can actually have a new one. We call it the Pongo Line. This Pongo Line is going to be sort of a pedestrian and bicycle-friendly line that will connect PDD to the Kallang corridor. And why it's important is because it caters to a very large community. As I mentioned to you, Pongo itself has already got a residential population of 350 people. Sengkang has another 300,000, and then Hougang and down south. So we almost connect 1 to 2 million people within Singapore. And if we can create a cycling path, you could actually provide an alternative mobility system and network for Singapore and relieve people from using cars, and also to supplement the mass rapid transport system. So you can see this is a calculation of the population that we were able to service using this Pongo line. And this is currently what is happening under the MRT tracks, which we wanted to convince the government to turn it into a bicycle-friendly bicycle path that will connect people all the way to the Kallang corridor, turning into a linear park and connecting the community. And when we needed to go overhead, it becomes land bridges and also sort of commercial, sort of a linear, overhead bridges where you can actually have people plying it. You have bicycles, you have people, pedestrians, but you could also activate it having kiosks and some sort of a convenience stores. So the other aspects of it being a community-centric development is the Pongo Line, bringing people to the campus boulevard and then to the waterfront, and then intersecting with the heritage trail. So these pathways are curated with sort of important nodes that will activate all the spines. We have the community park, we have the SIT forum, the nexus, the promenade plaza, and then the boulevard plaza. So you can see this were the two paths in the master plan. This is actually phase 1. This is currently under construction. We are also building all the buildings except for the plot 2 of SIT, but the rest of it is actually executed by us. So you can see there are major nodes, social enablers to activate this spine. You have the Boulevard Plaza, which is the entrance to the lower ground. We have located the hawker center, which is an important, affordable food facility, amenity for the residents and the community here. The bus interchange connecting to a community center and directly to the MRT and the Nexus, and also connecting to the forum of SIT. And then towards the waterfront, you have retail F&B, a market village, and the promenade plaza. And all this whole area, some 10 hectares, is very pedestrian friendly, and we have been able to create almost 3 hectares of park-like conserved forests within this master plan. So we curated all this kind of activities from outdoor sitting areas to ORAs, collaboration, collusion, we call it. We have encounters with art using the land bridge as an art platform. We have areas where we could bring in food trucks. We have temporary storage, temporary stalls and food kiosks, and even passive recreational areas, exhibition showcase areas, and also brainstorming areas for both the university and the industry. So these are some of the renderings and the images of the campus boulevard, starting with the Boulevard Plaza. Is a pedestrian-friendly mall. It's also the vibrant spine. Adjacent to this will be childcare center and playgrounds. The hawker center that I mentioned about. And then covered plaza spaces that are next to the community center, the PA Association Community Center, where events can take place. And above then is a bit of a convention facility for the business park. And seeing this collaboration loop, connecting all the buildings in phase 1 together. And actually you can see an enlarged solar canopy covering the connection between SIT and the business park, connecting 2 large nodes, the forum and the nexus, which would have congregation of almost a few thousand people at any one time. So this is the nexus. It's a multi-purpose, multi-use tropical community space. It is not air-conditioned, it's naturally ventilated. All the simulations were done. We'll show you later how this is actually a sort of a very porous space, allows breezes, cross-ventilation, and when there's no breezes, we actually have big sort of all these giant low voltage, high volume ceiling fans to move air around. And this is basically a multi-purpose space that on top of the MRT, hoping that this could be a bit of an outdoor exhibition space, performance space, also a commercial space as well. And then adjacent to that, connecting to that, Actually, before I go back to the other one, you can actually see on the top right is connecting across to SIT. And the next space that I show you is the SIT forum. So SIT will be connected directly through all these public spaces into the SIT forum, which is a amphitheater, and it looks up to the SIT library. This is the other end of the campus boulevard, is the retail and F&B section of it that brings people to the waterfront. And here we actually have a co-living space where we bring temporary residents into the area. And on the waterfront, there's a park-like setting, a market village, sort of having retail F&B next to the waterfront to activate the waterfront as well. I mean, it's important to think of design, not just from providing physical aspects of it, but curate and think about the real estate and the commercial aspect of it. Because without doing that, it is hard to think how to activate public spaces. So this is the Promenade Plaza, the waterfront, creating multi-purpose spaces for different uses, for performances, for boating, for bicycling, and also for F&B. Okay, the next one that is also important about this development is that it's nature-centric. And because of the heritage trail, and also a large part of it was fairly forested, we decided that we must try and save as much nature as possible. And at the same time, Pongo is a very dense place. It's high density and a high built-up environment with very little parks. Currently, you only have 0.87 hectares, but without what we were doing, it will drop down to 56 hectares per person. And I think the target would still to remain at 0.8, and hence in our development, we actually master plan a large portion of the heritage trail and the community park as a conservation area to conserve the large trees and nature within the master plan. In the original zoning plans, there was no considering given to creating a nature space. So we brought in Rainbow Tricycle and to conceive of what we could possibly think about as a biodiversity network by connecting nature hotspots. And this is what we get as part of it. We have a community park, conservation of large trees, building sensitively, trying not to tear down as much trees as possible. We're keeping almost all the major old trees here, and including creating canopy classrooms to bridge from building to building, giving students and giving the industry a different perspective of nature. And here is the repurposed Pongo Road turned into a heritage trail. It actually cuts, it actually is in the middle of the master plan, but turned into a pedestrian-friendly park-like environment. So in fact, when you walk this trail, you'll only see basically the forest and glimpses of the buildings. But at the same time, this is a business park. It was envisioned as a vibrant industry and educational facilities. We needed to facilitate another system. And this is about creating vibrancy, creating industry collaboration. And we wanted to sort of enable that through making connections between important buildings and hubs, important nodes. So here you can see these are the first phase developments. They are all the buildings are connected on the 5th level, connecting through the canopy walk. The classrooms are embedded in this canopy walk. It connects to the innovation bridge. Then it connects into what we call the forest veranda, where we have collaboration ports. And between the collaboration ports, there is a bridge that looks out into the park and bridges across the heritage trail. Then it connects to the waterfront parcels and also connecting to the the plot 2 of SIT, where you have the major administration, the auditoriums, and the major canteen spaces for the university. So the idea was to think of an intermediate level to make this collaboration, and using staircases and escalators to connect the various stories of the buildings, and also to discourage the use of lifts. We have actually very little lifts. We try to have more escalators and staircases, only trying to minimizing the lifts to sort of accommodate fire lifts and servicing. So you can see here is the red loop, and it's the collaboration loop, and how it actually plugs into most of the buildings. And as part of this collaboration loops, you have this interesting nodes, social spaces that is filled with nature and filled of collaboration sort of ports and nooks and corners. And then into larger atrium spaces, and this is called the Digital Cannon. This is one of the main business park buildings of JTC, and in the middle of it is a central courtyard that has got a central focus where it's actually being activated using sort of F&B cafes and some other sort of facilities enablers. It's actually quite important to, if you create spaces like that, also to think about how it could be activated. So all the classrooms and also the business park looks into a sort of a community park, a large forested area. It is also a resilient and productive district. And that's because of the last layer. It's the solar canopy layer and also the commercial farm layer. And we have one layer of commercial farms. This is actually currently being studied and implemented. And also on top of that, a PV canopy. This was the simulation that we did to justify our courtyard breezeway typology. The courtyard buildings are lifted off the ground and allow a very porous ground level for people and also for nature, and to create enough cross ventilation and wind flow throughout the master plan. So you can actually see the lower levels has got very good movement of air through the community park terrain. And again, looking at the section across SIT, the collaboration loop, and SIT has in fact itself an educational spine that connects itself at the 5th level and the 10th level through amphitheaters, learning spaces, and study ports. And then connecting between buildings will be the canopy walks, which are filled with study spaces and classrooms. And the ground level, you can see, is actually very porous, but we decided that we must have something to activate it. All the lecture theaters are basically on the ground level, and they are disguised as rocks, but contributing a lot of vibrancy to the ground level as well. And then SIT would connect to JTC. And there's a further scheme too, where SIT and JTC, the business park, exchange spaces, embedding the industry in the educational facilities, and the education side embeds into the business side to have better collaboration between the two major stakeholders. So this again is looking at the top. and then looking at the commercial farm layer as well. That brings me to the end of the PowerPoint presentation.
Wonderful.
And I did it on time.
Thank you so much, Mansam. You very patiently took us through what looks like amazing, changing large swathes of Singapore's land, really. We'll now take questions from the audience. Students and guests, please put in questions in the chat space. Students, please put your hand up to ask questions. We're all processing it. I wanted to ask a question. I'll start off, Mansam, then, if there is a space in there. You talked about the several kind of criteria, including one when you started showing the projects in Dubai about the self-sufficiency index, and the one for food seems to be very difficult to get to. And I wonder, in all of these projects, that when you work with several developers in large-scale scheme, where that conversation is happening, and what are the challenges, which I imagine they are, because I saw in those projects it's very hard to meet those indices.
Yes.
Self-sufficiency. Yeah.
Actually, I don't think food is difficult. And food is actually related to energy again. You need almost to harvest clean energy to facilitate food factories. We don't have the ground level, the amount of land to have one layer of farms. If we are to be self-sufficient in farm, we need to go vertical. We need to build food factories. And when we start building food factories, we need to generate enough sunlight and food for the plants. And you need to do it indirectly through harvesting clean energy and having sort of grow lights. So this is the way to do it. From the science point of view, it's possible, but we do need to generate enough clean energy for it. But if we are relying on fossil fuels to do it, it's not being fair about it. We are skirting the issue. We do really need to tackle clean energy first. And this is where I think beginning part of it, I think the biggest problem for a land limited country and city like Singapore, clean energy is the hardest. In the tropics, the only natural resource is sunlight. And whereas for other countries, you have wind, you have a wave, you have geothermal, and other forms of hydropower. Perhaps I'm not a big fan of hydropower because I think it ruins a large human population as well as sort of natural habitat. But so Singapore is in a difficult situation because we are land limited, and that we can't create enough horizontal surfaces to put solar panels. We do need to be very creative to do it. So that's where the inverted skyline is an important one for us, because we need to actually create an extensive roof. At the same time, create a large overhang as a shading device also. So it actually works in two ways: provide shade and shelter for people, but also enlarging our roof surface area to actually create this solar canopy. So, and I think within the next sort of decade or two, I think this situation remains fairly much the same thing, primarily because it's a limitation of how to create the horizontal area for it. Unless there is a big jump in the efficiency of solar panels, or there is a different way of generating solar energy, it may be quite a difficult challenge for Singapore. But certainly to get closer to producing clean energy, we must be creative about our building typologies and also our district and city planning. We do need to understand the systems, not just for form, but actually for for the urban and for the city forms as well, because we do need to dedicate the top layer really for harvesting of clean energy. And I think once we can do that, then I think food production is not the difficult thing, because we can indirectly create grow light. So the solution in SG Pavilion was important primarily because we needed to create a usable floor space, and we put it right at the top. But then it also then started to divide the solar canopy with the green. So it basically blocks all the sunlight going through. So with a combination of sun pipes and grow lights, the grow lights were engineered to provide efficient, low energy production of indirect lighting for the plants to thrive. So, and I think so it's through a indirect way we can create sort of food factories. Currently, it's already being implemented in Singapore in the high value vegetables. They use LED lights to do the food production. But my biggest bugbear about that is that while it actually does create self-sufficiency in food, is that not using clean energy to generate the energy for it. So
No, but
until we can solve the problem of energy, self-sufficiency in food is also difficult.
yeah, yeah. But I was just wondering, with large large projects like the one in Jurong or Pongo, where large areas of the land are being reimagined, or Mandai, how much of this is featuring, considering the SG Green Plan, in the conversations or commitment to, a certain apportioning or allocation of structures, buildings to incorporate, provide for food as part of the larger strategy of redeveloping, whether that is being considered
Yeah, there will
in.
be always a conflict between having commercial farms under solar panels. Because to a certain extent, if you use the monocrystalline PV panels, they do block the amount of light getting through the commercial farms. So you need to space them apart so that there is enough daylight coming through that helps the plants to grow. You don't 100% need full sunlight, but you do need enough sunlight to make the plants grow. So in our initial calculation, we are able to create enough self-sufficiency in food in one roof layer for a certain population, like in Pongo and for the new town. We got no problem doing that, provided we actually create a large enough solar canopy that generates even more energy for it. So I think it's a critical balance between which is the priority. Is it energy or is it food? For residential, because of the usage of energy is lower, at most is use of air conditioning, which is high, and refrigerators. And a lot of public housing is using natural ventilation through good planning and sort of studying district cooling. We can actually have less reliance on air conditioning. So it is very possible to be zero energy for residential with zero energy and also self-sufficient in food and vegetables at least. I'm not talking about other food like proteins and things like that. That one does consume a lot more energy. So and I think that will be we all have to be vegetarians basically. So that's why I was saying one of the strategies for the plan for the earth to regenerate is that we must convince people to be vegetarians, go plant-based, or we have to do lab-based production of food as well.
Yeah, thank you. I think
So
there's
it does
quite.
need mindset change.
Yeah, yeah,
Veggie
definitely.
burgers, I'm afraid we have to eat.
Yes, it tastes very nice. There's quite a number of questions here coming up. Great presentation, wonderful presentation, outstanding presentation, but also a question is, quite a lot of holistic sustainable systems were discussed in the first presentation pertaining to architecture. What were the challenges that WOHA faced when translating these on the urban scale? Yeah.
What are the challenges? I think for us is dealing with people is the biggest challenge, and convincing people. I think the reality is that people don't see the bigger picture. Even I think it's hard for people to see the, when we talk about regenerative scale, saving the human race and the planet. I think as an individual, you always think, can I really do that? So people are not, and people don't sort of come on board in the ideas because they sort of don't look at the bigger picture, but look at a smaller area of influence. So they will be happy to look at themselves, their community, but not larger than that. So this is where I find maybe I'm not persuasive enough, or maybe the messaging is wrong. But I think that's human nature. I think people don't tend to realize the problem until we are deep in it, which we currently are. And I think with the climate change, well, I mean, we've been talking about this ever since the energy crisis, where we graduated. And we have always been very consistent in which the way we approach our practice about being sustainable, being environmentally conscious. And now the world has caught up. Basically, we have major disasters. We have flooding, we have forests burning away, forest fires and things like that. And people are now realizing, hey, it is real. We are now in a difficult situation. What can we do? And I think the younger generation, maybe all you guys out there, you all get it. But I think those people who sit behind in the Mercedes-Benz and BMW, they are beyond, they kind of think it will not affect me anymore. Do I need to engage in this issue anymore? I think this is rather sad, but I do think that is the problems as well. People not everyone is buying into this problem. Certainly, Donald Trump didn't, and we do need to try and bring everyone on board on this, because I think it's going to be a collective effort globally, but not just individuals or small communities. It needs to be on a global scale now. So this is it's a very challenging times for the human race, and I think I find the hardest part is communication in our job, in our projects. But having said that, we don't kind of tell our clients and our developers that we like you to save the world. we do have to smuggle some of these good strategies, just do good things to them, because I think they, as like I said before, not everyone see the bigger picture of it.
Yeah, I wonder also, and we had this conversation with Gregors for his talk a couple of days ago, where we were talking about where does change come from, and so there is this argument that it has to come from an act of persuasion, that either for reasons of self-interest or goodwill, that a developer or an architect or an occupant will invest their time or their money into these types of solutions. But I wonder if that sort of bottom-up approach is reaching its limits, given the urgency that we face right now. When one of the conversations that we've had, Mansam, in studio is that the structure of finance has to change. We have to put a price on real value of or price on things. The externalities have to be factored in. So when you buy a cheap T-shirt from a developing country, you're not factoring the social or the environmental cost of producing that T-shirt. It's suppressed. The real cost is suppressed. But the other thing is that the distribution of money has to be reimagined. So the three systems that you talked about in terms of self-sufficiency, food, energy, and water. So water is a no-brainer. It's very quick payback. We've shown the numbers on this. But maybe energy has some timeline, but the technologies are getting better. So it's now less than 10 years already. But food is a stretch target. And I think as you begin to ask people to invest through their buildings, in these systems, the structure of incentives has to change. If food is truly important and we want more people, office building owners or schools to participate in food production, then that has to be subsidized, because nobody in their right minds are going to do it. There's no amount of goodwill or climate emergency that's going to make them want to throw money at this. So I think, I know we talked about this a lot in studio and so now. But I think this is a point that needs to be brought up, that there's a limit to the goodwill, the bottom-up logic.
Oh, absolutely. I think you do need bottom-up and top-down now. And I think it is necessary for both to come together. I think it's a wake-up call for governments and politicians. They do need to embrace it. That they need to rethink it. My general thinking is that maybe food is not as, I think for Singapore at least, because we are land limited, is the direction that Singapore should take is not low value food, but a higher value food. Because I think Singapore has the infrastructure, and also because our cost is higher, they kind of need to move up the value bracket for food production. So you don't produce lettuce, because lettuce is so cheap. It's so easy to grow, But we do have to concentrate on maybe high value vegetables. Kale is one of those that seems to find quite good financial marketing sense. We may have to consider mushrooms and fungus, like I said before, because they are certainly high value again, and that doesn't need a lot of light. And then, of course, the other one that Singapore is pursuing is still at its infancy stage, is lab-based food. And I think those ones do need the kind of environment in Singapore to push the agenda. So, I think food, I think all governments at the end of the day are going to be very practical and realistic. Somewhat what I say and what we do, we are always making it an idealistic position, right? We really need to push the agenda so that at least when we execute it, it is a high level. So this is something that we must always continue to do. But the reality is that self-sufficiency in food can come in terms of trade-off between countries, perhaps. In Singapore, we don't have to see ourselves as a landlocked country, but if we are good with our neighbors, we can actually have food from them. We can also borrow their land for energy at a cheaper price. I think these are all possible, and I think that's a different discussion. That is the top level. Governments and politicians, they can do that between countries, and I think that also addresses the resilience and also the self-sufficiency. But I just from our studio itself, I think the issue of whether or not we can do it within cities is very interesting, and that we do need to be creative and think of the box and reimagine new typologies that actually do that. And I think that's the value of the studio.
We have a question here from the future mayor of Yogyakarta, Desta. Remember Desta?
Oh, yes. Yes, the future mayor of Desta. And I will have to start saying that this is a cost to make your mayors. It's not about making your architects or ESD experts. It's actually to convince you to need to be decision makers and be mayors and city planners.
So the
Yes.
future mayor of Jogja wants
Yes.
to know. She says, well, first of all, it's always amazing attending your class. You mentioned creating encounters among people. However, in the pandemic situation, there are many changes to public space. Mostly rooftop and public parks are closed. So she wants to know if the pandemic has changed the thinking on this.
My dear Desta, this is not the first time that the human race has come across such a devastating virus. The last global one was the Spanish flu, and the Spanish flu has become your normal flu, basically. And I think, if anything, to see the positive side of and see what is it? See the light at the end of the tunnel, because good things emerges out of this pandemics. The last time it happened, the Spanish flu, global healthcare became improved a lot, and I think that was a very good outcome of it. What is the good outcome of this? We will find out very soon. But the reality is that the world has been able to come up with a vaccine in such a short time. Is actually, to most governments and politicians, is already a miracle. And I think it was the panic button pressed and the whole world working together to find a vaccine for it. So, and I think don't think that this pandemic is going to define the future. It will not. We do need to learn the lessons of this pandemic, and what the new normal will be is, I don't think it's going to be very far from the old normal. But I think once the vaccines is sort of distributed throughout the world, then I think there's a chance of the world emerging out of this pandemic. I think the current problems is actually the inequality in the distribution of vaccines between rich countries and poor countries. While Singapore is very fortunate, we've certainly gotten up to the level, but we are so dependent on our surrounding neighbors as well. So the opening up is also not possible, primarily because anything that comes in, gets the reinfection. But I think we don't have to panic about it. Be brave, I think. I think the end of the tunnel, see the light. I think it's going to come soon.
Thank you, Mansam. Here's an amazing question for you. It's the perfect question to round up this afternoon's session, and it's you can make a passionate pitch. There's a student from UGM Indonesia who says, I want to ask a simple question. What kind of world, or maybe Singapore, do you want in the next 100 years?
Okay. It's strange that you asked that, because as we were just discussing with Namal, we're just finishing a video. Hopefully we will post it sometime, of Singapore in 2100, where we envision that the world has solved the global warming problem. We have managed to sort of handle the carbon emission through many ways. One of the key things that I'm driving and pushing for as a advocate is the 50-50 city, where it's necessary for humans to see ourselves as part of nature, and that we do need to be the steward for protecting nature, and that we need to revert 50% of our planet, of our cities to nature. This is an important thing. And some of the things that you get out of it is, of course, the ecosystem services that nature does for the humans and for the planet. I think it's very essential that we be able to do that. And I think that is a plea that I would like to make for the world. Some of the strategies we also had was how we turn around and make a 15-minute vertical city to reverse suburban sprawls, but densify the cities, so that once we densify the cities, we can revert some of our urban land, urban environment back to rewilding and renatured. And at the same time, make compact cities where we can rely less on transportation, where we can actually rely more on sort of a slow, pedestrian-friendly spaces, pedestrian environments, PMDs, but connected by sort of fast mobility like public transportation. And I think this is the ideal situation for me. And I think it is possible. We will put out a video to show you what it'll be like, hopefully. And we all can look forward to it. The thing is, I will not see it to that day. At most it's 2050, but I think some of you might live till 2100, isn't it?
Very much hope so. Well, by that time, they might be starting to extend life as well. We're already seeing.
Okay, that
not like
apparently
I
is
said.
not science. You can't extend life.
No,
You can live as long as humans are designed to live, but I think you can't live beyond. I think scientifically they worked it out. You can't extend life further than say 100, basically.
Yeah, I read that
Yeah.
paper. I think it's 100 plus 120.
Yeah, 100 plus is if you are really healthy. You know, you do the right things, eat the right things. You could be centenarian, but most people are still likely to sort of drop off in 80s or 90s as well.
Plant-based diets, nicer and greener environments. I think it's all going to be
absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the environment is good, and we need to treat ourselves well.
Yeah.
It's part of the wellness and the holistic strategy.
Thank you so much, Mansam, for generously giving up so much of your time and sharing so freely all of your works and your points of view. Really appreciate it. I saw all the students were smiling when you talked about mushroom farming. It's just become an ISD thing now. So thanks ever so much. Thank you also to all the attendees, in particular our guests in the second room. And before you go, you know, the next webinar is going to be our last webinar, which will be on Monday, the 30th, and it's going to be from 5 to 6:30 p.m. By Wolfgang Kessling, the principal and partner in Trans-Solar Energy Technique. Wolfgang's knowledge over many years on ventilation systems and energy efficient buildings have led him to develop innovative solutions with architects and design teams worldwide in diverse climatic environments. This lecture will lay grounds on the major environmental parameters affecting thermal comfort in the context of tropical climate and link the topic to Trans-Solar project examples. So the registration is now open if you wish to join us. And finally, I would make another pitch for our MSc Integrated Sustainable Design Program. Please visit the website and email me. Yeah, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you once again, Mansam, for spending the day with us. It's very, very kind of you. Thank you on behalf of all the ISD students and Nirmal and myself. Thanks, and thanks everyone for joining. Take care.
Thank you, Mansam.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you. See you all on Monday. In class. Yeah. See you. Thanks, Nirmal.